All right, we're back. It's COMP2007. It's week 10, I would say, lesson 10, part 1. And in week 10, we're talking about security today, how to secure our sites. So this is coming right from the book. So if you're following along with ASP.NET, this book here, 4.5.1, and C# and VB. Obviously, we're not going to do the C#, sorry, the VB part piece. We will be working with C#. And there is, I'm going to create a kind of a modified example of the stuff that we're going to be doing from the exercise, right? So we're not going to follow exactly what the exercise asks us to do. All right, so what are we going to do? We want to kind of put together, like I said to you before, by the way, I think we're in chapter 16, if I'm not wrong, from the book. That's where we're at, so because we're skipping chapters here and there. So that's the part we're hitting. So again, we've been creating websites that are kind of accessible to everybody, but we've got to create kind of a mechanism to stop people from being able to go to whatever site they want to. So think about how we did it in PHP, right? In PHP, what you do is if you check if the person's authenticated per page, it's a pain in the ass, right? And you can also create a global check, kind of authentication. So if the person's not authenticated, they can't go to a particular folder, and that's the easier way to do it. We're going to do kind of the same thing here with ASP.NET. But in order for us to do that, there's some controls we're going to try and drag and drop. We also got to create our scaffold for our bootstrap, because we're going to start from scratch today. And the reason why we can't use our previous files that we used, our boilerplate, is because we need to add an additional information in there, right? And I could start with the boilerplate, but the problem is I'd have to kill you, right? So that's no good, right? So we'd have to start off from scratch. And there's some reasons for this. Okay, let's continue. And I've got a blank page in my file. Thank God I didn't need that one. Okay, and let's go to introducing security. So it checks who you are, how can you prove who you are. That's really what security is all about. And what are you allowed to see? How can you get access to it? Right? Those are the basic three things. Right? Keep in mind that security is only as strong as the weakest link. I think you need to kind of hear that. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I'll say it again. So if you give your password out to your sister, brother, friend, dog, and they get into the system, that's you being the weakest link. Eventually, we will have this. More people will be using two-step authentication. Who does that? Who uses two-step authentication? Anybody? Yay, one person does two-step authentication, along with me. I use two-step authentication. How do you do that? You can certainly set that up. There's an app that you can download from Google for your phone, for either Apple, an iOS phone, or Android. And what you do is you can set up, if you're using Outlook or some other, or even Gmail, nowadays you can kind of turn on two-step authentication, which prevents you from being the weakest link so easily. Even if you give your password to somebody else, they still need to have, the extra token that you only can provide from your app that comes from your Android device or your Apple device that you have to be actually logged into. It's another step to prove that it's you. So take a look at two-step authentication so we can reduce, us being the weakest link. Although again, it's just another thing to think about. Eventually, the way to go is not to have a username and password at all right, and to not think like human beings, where we have to authenticate with a username and password, but rather to authenticate in a different manner. Maybe biometrics in combination with something else. And by the way, biometrics are only so good as long as you're alive, right? Because there's always ways of like chopping a hand off and putting it on a door, right? Or taking an eyeball out and putting it in a retina scanner, right? But what we want to do is actually measure that the person is alive, that there's actually blood flowing through his veins. And there is a way of doing that. They're developing something where they are monitoring a heart rate. Everyone's heart rate is unique. It's a unique signature. There's other ways as well, brain waves and so on. But they monitor, not that they read your mind or anything like that, but that, they monitor your activity. You're unique. They take a pattern. And then, of course, you have to be very calm when you go into the door, right? Because if you're not calm, when your heart rate's racing, it's not you. So they're gonna, or maybe multiple stage authentication. So it's gonna be like, different biometrics, like, handprint identifier, retina scan, heart rate, whatever. And it all happens so quickly, maybe a little bit of DNA, who knows, right? But that's privacy, right? And then that they can tell that it's you. But for now, those are the three methods. Who are you? We use username and password. How can you prove it? Right? It's your password. And what are you allowed to see? It's what your role is from an administrative perspective. Do you have administrative access? Are you just a standard user? What do you do? So I'm not going to go too much into authentication. You can certainly read this in the book yourself. But really, authentication is I like this, and if I put it on a test, and if my test actually works this time around, then authentication is about providing evidence about who you are, and that means you have to know your username and password, right? So how do we have the system know this? Well, the system is going to provide this information somewhere in a database with your password being hashed, right? So you can't just like go and read a text-based password. Otherwise, again, the weakest link then it becomes your database, right? So again, two things that that stop us from accessing what we're allowed to do is what privileges do we have, right? And or in other words, is what permissions does the current user have, and the authorization rules, and what the resource the user is trying to access. Can he access that, or can she access it? So I'm not going to go too much in here. But that's kind of very high level of what security does. Because remember, we're not really a security course, but we want to try and talk about basic stuff that you would already know. All right, so let's talk about a few services. And again, what ASP.NET does is it uses this idea of a provider model, right? So the provider, there's a few providers. There is a role provider. There is a membership provider, right? And just think about this. What this is. So when we're talking about security right now for old ASP.NET web forms, we're talking about membership type security, not identity. In the newer security model that is used in ASP.NET MVC, it's identity, Microsoft Identity. We're not going to be using identity, we're going to be using membership, which is kind of the older way of doing it. And if you're using ASP.NET web forms, chances are you're going to be using membership, right? So it's just a different kind of security model. So again, there's three different providers that we cover. They're all covered in the book, pretty good. Membership, which enables how you manage what user accounts are in your system. Roles, what they can access, and a profile, which allows you to store user-specific data. That's going to be covered. Maybe if we have time next week, I'll try and cover profile a little bit, in addition to what we've covered today. But those are the three things, providers, if you will, that come with this whole membership services. So let's take a look at this as a kind of a high level. So you've got your membership, your roles, your profile, and your other services, your providers, your membership provider, your role provider, profile provider, and whatever. And also your data stores. You got SQL Server, your Active Directory, maybe it's Oracle, maybe you have Microsoft Access as a database store. And the other one we should try to mention is Azure, which is what we're going to be doing with us. We're going to try and make this all go, by the way, difficult as it is, on the web, on Azure, on the cloud, right? Because that's what I'd like you to do. When you create your websites, I want you to have authentication, right, at some point or another. And, it needs to be on the cloud, right? So, we have to talk about that as if you're going to program it on the cloud. Okay, so let's take a look at these services in a nutshell. Again, membership services and roles, they don't actually talk. That's one thing I should say. They don't talk directly, with the database. It talks almost through another layer of abstraction. That's what these things do, right? So again, provider is this idea of this piece of software that is designed for a different task. So you have your membership provider, like I said. You have your role provider, and so on, right? And I go into it here, how to get this. One of the things we need to go, and when we create a provider, is we need to get this idea of this universal provider that we're going to add in through NuGet. So when we get into Visual Studio and we start building our application, we need to get this universal provider, right? And all it is an extension or an add-on that goes into our website. And what it does, it downloads all the information we need, the DLLs that we require for our application to function. And then we have access to these three providers that we can add into our web.config file. Okay. From a data store perspective, again, in the past, we used to see it on things like a local SQL server. or SQL Compact. They also have it for local DB. So if we're testing it, let's say locally on your machine, which is what we're going to start doing, we'll start with local DB, and then eventually for SQL Azure, because SQL Azure is what we're going to try and get it to. We're going to go to we're going to start with that as opposed to something local. So I wanted to mention also about identity, and that we're not really doing ASP.NET identity here, just to say that again. That's more of an advanced topic, and it's really meant for MVC5 frameworks, right? Or MVC, ASP.NET MVCs. We're not going to cover that in this course. Okay, so let's talk about login controls. And the best way to do this login control stuff is to actually do it, like with us together, right? So what I'd like you to do is whip up your Visual Studio 2013, right? And we're going to start doing this because it's going to take us most of the class, right? So be prepared. This is an intense thing. We'll take a break somewhere in the middle. And, there's going to be some heartache. There's going to be stuff that doesn't work. And when it doesn't work for you, and if it breaks, please put up your hand and we'll slow things down. We'll maybe stop the video a couple times because I want to make sure that you guys get this piece. Once you get it, you'll realize there's some easy ways to do it that are looking pretty ugly. And there's some harder ways to do it that that can look pretty slick, right? So we have to kind of go through both iterations. So first thing we want to do is we're going to create a new ASP.NET project. So we're just going to do that. I'm going to kind of go in here, and if you notice, these are my trials and failures, right? What's that?
More, right?
I got some. Oh, this one I'm going to see. I'm going to see him. I'll see him, and. Yeah, I'm going to see him. I'm going to see him. I'm going to see him. Picture him. Maybe him. I got Andrew interrupting my video. Christopher Dixon. David. Yeah. AJ. Yeah. Hey, that's good. I got that guy. I got this guy here. I haven't got Steven. Letter, right, for Steven.
Oh, wow.
Maybe, yeah. I don't even know all these ones here. Let's see.
And if you don't see people or whatever, just return them to me next week, or who we won't see next week.
No.
Yeah?
Not here. Sorry. Well, we're taking a break with this craziness.
My name is Joe. Can I take me?
Yeah. So yeah, we're taking a bit of a break because Angie just came into class. So before we start off with our example, I'm just going to pause the video while we're interrupted.